Welcome to you from Malvern in Worcestershire. Now, Malvern sits in a beautiful setting of hills and countryside, and it's a town that's generally considered to be very prosperous and wealthy. Now, I'm Barry Jones, and I'm a member of the Lansdowne Methodist Church here in Great Malvern. This church has initiated a series of question time debates to encourage public engagement, and particularly on matters that adversely affect disadvantaged, deprived, and often neglected groups of people in the local community. During this short video, we want to show you how our debate on the question, why a food bank in Malvern, how it played out here in the church one Saturday in October 2014. Membership of the platform panel comprised 2 politicians and 2 experts, with an independent chairman. Our politicians were Harriet Baldwin, who's the Conservative MP for the area and a government whip, and Daniel Walton, who's the Labour parliamentary candidate for the area. Our experts were James Milton, who's the Southern England Food Bank Network Manager for the Trussell Trust, and Sue Rogers, Head of Services for Worcester City Early Help, working for Action for Children. The chair was the Reverend David Haslam, MBE. David's a Methodist minister who has been active in social issues all of his ministry. And so we now join the debate.
I know from my work as a constituency MP that there are many different personal circumstances where local residents get a sudden shock to their income and there's no money left that week to buy food. I can think of many examples from my constituency casework where I've been asked to help local people at a time of crisis. And of course there are people who have a dependency on alcohol, drugs, or who have fluctuating mental health conditions. And all of these are examples of the kind of people that I've been approached by to help, and I've been able to steer them to this important network of support that we have in civil society here in Malvern, helping those in need, including people from the Citizens Advice Bureau, the Crisis Fund, the credit unions, and of course the local food bank.
The question on our sheet is why a food bank in Malvern? And the simplistic answer is because Malvern is no different to the rest of the UK. So the question then becomes, why food banks right across the UK? It used not to be so. Although the first food aid charities go an awful long way back, and the likes of the Salvation Army have always been active in providing emergency food to the destitute, the last few years have seen a radical increase in the number of food banks across this country, and an equally substantial rise in the numbers being referred to them. That access to a food bank is not by self-referral. You do not walk up to a food bank and say, I need help, because there will be no way of validating whether that person was in genuine need.
I've worked Malvern Hills for 10 years. I've walked the deprivation. I've walked the child poverty. I can take you to places in Malvern that there really is significant need. Why is it we need a food bank in Malvern? Lots of people would ask the same thing. When we got together to look at developing a food bank in Malvern, we gave a very similar presentation, myself and another colleague, about some of the areas, some of the deprivation, and it isn't just about poverty, it's about rural isolation.
Now, food banks opening every week across the UK, a food bank in Malvern, it doesn't feel anymore like we're all in this together, does it? By the end of this year, there'll be 1 million and a quarter visits to the food banks made by people in the UK. It stands at just over 900,000 at the moment. That's 900,000 people using food banks across the country. This number's growing dramatically. It's 7 times greater than it was just 3 years ago. That's 7 times in just 3 years it's increased. And incredibly, 20 times more than when this coalition government came into power just 5 years ago. A third of those supported, as we've already heard, are children. Why a food bank in Malvern? Because we're not in this together, never have been since 2010, and we won't be until 2015. Thank you.
there were a number of questions about the living wage. So I'm going to ask Mike Hayes to ask his question about why a food bank in Malvern.
I'm with the Foodbank, as you can see. A number of our clients are in work but claiming benefits. Why does the UK government supplement the incomes of working people from government funds instead of requiring their employers to pay a living wage?
And there were a lot of other questions. I'm just going to add in Lucy Hodgson's question. There's been much debate about paying the living wage instead of the minimum wage. How can employers in low-pay industries such as catering afford to do this, pay them a living wage, without laying staff off in order to save their wages bills? So it's a complex question, but I'm going to ask Daniel to start on this one.
Okay. Thank you. The living wage, and I'm an employer as well, so I can kind of look at this from both angles and hopefully answer both of those questions. You get a lot more when you pay a living wage in terms of an employee than when you just pay them the minimum wage or if you put them on a 0-hour contract. You firstly get, and I know this from experience, you get loyalty from that member of staff. You get like they feel like they're part of the company and they want to work for their employer. So I think it's very important from a morale point of view, not just from a financial point of view, that people are paid a wage that means that they can go home, they can feed their family, and they can invest maybe in some luxuries as well in life rather than just scraping to get by because of the work that they're doing. What you've got then is you've got a happy working workforce who aren't having to rely on food banks, who aren't having to rely on benefits, so hence we're cutting out the cost of benefits there as well, which obviously we have seen increasing. And also, you've got a situation where the increase in food banks, which we're seeing at the moment, wouldn't continue. So I think the living wage is very, very important, both from a morale point of view, from an employer point of view, and from an employee point of view.
Okay. Thank you, Sue.
I think that there are issues around potential living wage. If I think of kind of some of the client group that we would work with, childcare for me is the first thing to think about. They're often not highly paid employees. We're looking at putting children into more hours of childcare. If we then put living wage onto that, we've already got a lot of childcare that's not making a lot of money. It's squeeze on squeeze, and it's how we deal with the squeeze on squeeze. The other issue for me is if we up either the minimum wage or we go to a living wage, that affects their benefits. So you give in one hand and you take away in another. So it's, as much as I agree with a living wage proposition, we need to make sure that actually that person is better off for it, not that we're just making the employer pay more and not paying as much benefit and they're on the same or less money.
Okay, fair enough. Harriet.
Thank you, David. I just wanted to sort of start with a few facts and figures. The minimum wage went up on the 1st of October to £6.50 an hour. And the living wage, which is set by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, is a wage where you can afford, a bit more than the minimum, and is £7.65 an hour. The government does supplement some people on the minimum wage with working tax credits and indeed child tax credits. So depending on your family circumstances, you can have the minimum wage supplemented. Not everyone will get that, and it will depend on you working a minimum amount of hours. I think that what will happen through inflation is that over the next 5 years or so, the minimum wage will go up much closer to £7.65 to £8. In fact, probably a little bit over £8. But what you wouldn't want to do is to see, obviously inflation would mean that the cost of that basket of goods that the living wage purchases would also go up. And you wouldn't want to require everyone to suddenly move to the living wage because it might have a damaging impact on the number of jobs. And it's obviously not great news for people if they haven't got a job because an employer can't actually afford to employ them.
James, on the living wage.
We're just coming, hopefully out of, though that's not entirely clear, a period of significant national financial stress. And I think the question will be down to the next government of whatever stripe it is after the elections next year, whoever is in government, the policies that they choose will determine the answer to this question. And the Trussell Trust would applaud policies that support those most in need and would be troubled by policies that had the opposite effect, to decide whether what we may observe in the growth of demand of food banks is the beginning of an ongoing trend or a short-term response to a relatively short-term period of national difficulty.